Back in the late 90s, three Texas businessmen were frustrated with the ability to manage and grow their businesses in the United States. And these three people felt that the income tax system penalized people who had initiative and wanted to work hard. They didn't know how to fix it. But what they did was put their money where their mouth was. What they did was fund a study to explore different ways to fund our government, but in a fair way. So what they did was put a number of people together from all walks of life, from all the ideological walks of life. People on the left, people on the right, people on the center, accountants, bankers, lawyers, businessmen, engineers. They found this group together, and he only gave them one action to work on. Come up with a different way to fund our government and make it fair. Time passed, these people got together, they were paid for their services certainly, and they came out with something called the fair tax, and it's what we're going to talk about here today. So that's where it came from, its startings, and who was behind it. Matt said a few things about me. The companies I work for, because I'll get into that a little later, were basically electrical companies. Thomas & Betts was a $2.5 billion electrical company out of Memphis, Tennessee. Siemens is a large German conglomerate. I was in the electrical side of that business. Alabama Shipyard, I worked for a little less than 2 years here, and that's what brought me down here in the first place 14 years ago. Let's talk about the problem as I see it. And let me add at this point, these things that I say in here and these numbers that I quote can all be found at the website. They were all a result of extensive research papers done by PhDs who support this bill. What's the problem in this? One of the big problems in this country, especially when it regards to taxes are concerned. The recovery of our economy is the slowest it's been since the 30s. We're still not out of it. I mean, it's just very, very slow in spite of what you read in the paper. Unemployment and underemployment, there are levels not seen since the 30s. You know, 5.4 is the latest figure of unemployment. Who believes here that that's a true indication of what's going on in our country with unemployed? Anybody? Well, let me take you back. Let me take you back to the end of January. The Wall Street Journal did an extensive study on unemployment and employment and unemployment in this country. And they found that 11.3% is the number. If they take the government numbers that go into the at the time the government was quoting a 5.8% unemployment rate. It's 5.4 now, 5.8 then. They found that 11.3% were either unemployed officially by the US government or working in jobs less than full-time and wanted to work in full-time jobs. They didn't even count the people who have quit looking for work. So that 11.3, you can add 2, 3, maybe 3.5% on top of that. Back in the end of January, we were looking at maybe 14% of the people who should be working in America were not working, as opposed to the 5.8 that was the government specific at that point in time. Our debt's at record levels, 18 point something trillion dollars. Each of us is in debt. Everybody in this country is in debt up to the tune of about $58,000. If we all worked over $58,000, we could put the debt to zero. We're printing money to keep things going. Now, that's not having any short-term effects, but long-term, that's trouble. It's always trouble when you print money. Never a good thing. IRS is out of control. I think we all know that, especially from the Republican side. Both Democrats and Republicans have abused the IRS over the years. Democrats maybe more, especially here in the last 6 years. Current federal income tax code is broken. There's been almost 2 changes a day. Every day Congress has been in session for the last 22 years. 2 a day for 22 years. That's how many changes. And I doubt any of you could tell me 5 changes that have happened in the last 22 years, let alone almost 10,000. Congress, Senate, the White House, they haven't been able to get much done. Is there a solution? Yeah. It's the fair tax bill. It's H.R. 25 in the House of Representatives and S. 155 in the Senate. Most thoroughly vetted tax proposal in existence. There's been $22 million spent on this thing, developing it and defending it over the last 15 years. Where does that money come from? People like us who have forked over the money, made contributions to keep this idea going. It eliminates all taxes on incomes of any sort, whether it be your job, income from your job, payroll taxes, corporate taxes, capital gains, interest, dividends, you name it. There's no more taxes on income. You make as much as you want. God bless you. It taxes consumption of new goods and services. Okay? New goods and services at the retail level. So if you go to Walmart and you buy something, you're going to pay a tax when you buy that. That's the tax. If you are like me and frugal, you won't spend a lot of money on taxes. If you're a big spender, you're a Donald Trump, you're going to spend a lot of money on taxes, okay, based on consumption. It provides a prebate so no American pays a tax up to the basic poverty level for the size of the family. We'll get into this prebate a little later because it's a neat idea. Normally, consumption taxes, everybody poo-poos, and for good reason. Consumption taxes, like our 9.5% sales tax here? I'm trying to remember in Alabama. It varies. Okay. Okay. You know, that hurts you if you buy a loaf of bread and you're only making $20,000 a year. It might not hurt you so bad if you're making $90,000 a year and you buy that same loaf of bread. It hurts the poor. That's why this prebate is in play. It nullifies and makes every American not pay taxes on the basic necessities of life. And I'll show you a little bit more about that later. It generates tax dollars equal to the current amount. That's a lie. In fact, the last 2 years I have data for, it's exceeded the amount of revenue generated by our federal income tax system. In 2011, it generated $150 billion more than we took in through the income tax system. In 2012, it generated $250 billion. It would have generated $250 billion more than the income tax system generated. Okay? So it exceeds what we have now. It eliminates the IRS. A lot of people love this. I don't really care. It eliminates the IRS because you don't need the IRS to do this anymore. IRS has a budget of about $12.5 billion, has 45,000 or 48,000 employees, something like that. You don't need that. In the bill is only 150 pages long. Our current income tax code is more than 74,000 pages long. So this 150-page bill takes care of how this thing is going to be managed. In the bill, it states that the IRS is defunded after 2 years and 9 months of the fair tax being made the law of the land. Why 2 years and 9 months? Well, that's the best estimate there is of how long it's going to take the IRS to clean up the mess that they have created for themselves and for a lot of our citizens. Once that happens, they're no longer funded, they're disbanded. We currently have 68 co-sponsors in the House of Representatives of this bill. Joe Bonner was one, Bradley Byrne is not one. We have, and in the Senate, there's 6 co-sponsors of this bill. Best of all, and this is what I like about the thing, given my background that I'll fill you a little bit more in later, it makes the economy boom by making this place, America, the low-cost place to do business. Nobody in this country that I've been able to determine is dealing with the issue of why we lost jobs in the first place. We've been losing jobs since the early 80s, going offshore. A good 25 to 30 years of losing jobs. And the reason we've lost those jobs is because we can't compete. This is the only thing that I've seen that allows us to compete worldwide and be able to pay people 20, 25, 30 bucks an hour here with good benefits and still be able to compete worldwide. This is the only thing that does it. Why will the economy boom? No business-to-business taxes. If you make widgets and you have to buy some supplies, whether it be raw materials for your widgets or supplies for your office or whatever, you pay no taxes on anything you have to purchase to be able to put into your end product. No taxes in business or business-to-business transactions. All embedded taxes are gone. I'll show you a slide here in a minute that talks about embedded taxes. And it's monstrous. You'd be surprised at how big the burden is through American industry with embedded taxes. Our costs to make products go down anywhere from 15 to 25%. 15 to 25%. I used to send jobs offshore. If we could make 10% by sending something to Mexico, that was a home run. 15 to 25% is what the potential is with enacting the fair tax. It's huge. There's $15 trillion sitting offshore. Nobody wants to bring it back because it'll be taxed. Under the fair tax, it comes back untaxed to be invested in productive enterprises. Employment soars as good paying jobs return. Okay? Let me tell you about a couple of little situations, what I did in my, when I was employed. I've been retired now almost 10 years, and I wouldn't go back, quite frankly. Worked for, basically two companies, Thomas & Betts and Siemens. Both were very acquisitory. We bought a lot of companies. For example, back in 1985, I worked for Thomas & Betts, and we were $250 million in sales, making electrical products. Outlet boxes, what's behind these boxes, the face plates, whether it be plastic or steel, a lot of the things that are, if you take this ceiling away and you find things in the ceiling that are holding things together, we made all those kind of things. We bought a lot of companies. And within 10 years, 1995, we were $2.5 billion. We grew in 10 years by a factor of 10. That's huge. And we did that certainly from the sales of these acquisitions, plus the leverage it gave us by buying more electrical products that were purchased by our customers that we didn't make. I was involved in over a dozen of these acquisitions, anywhere from being a member of the negotiating team to the person who tried to transition the new company into our company, or the person who ended up shutting down the factory and moving it offshore. Okay? Out of this, let's just say 12 to make the number a nice round dozen. Out of the 12 I was involved in, one we kept in its former location, and it was a Canadian operation. The other 11, we moved offshore. Why did we move them offshore? Our competition was offshore, and once somebody goes in your industry and it goes offshore, you're stuck with the dilemma that they have probably a 10% cost advantage on you, and they can do a lot of different things with a 10% cost advantage on you. So we moved stuff out. We just moved jobs out of the country. It's my opinion that if the fair tax, this isn't a fact, this is an opinion, if the fair tax would have been the law of the land back in '84, I don't think we would have lost a job in this country, because we would have been able to compete worldwide with the Mexicos, Chinas, Czechoslovakias, or wherever the heck else you want to go. That's what the fair tax would have done if it was the law. What's life like under a fair tax? No taxes are paying out of your paycheck. Your gross is your net. Your gross is your net. It's a big deal. Your gross is your net. No records to keep, no filing of forms in April, no more April 15th deadline, doesn't matter. You decide how much you pay in taxes based on your spending habits. 95% of the collection system, retailers, is already in place. System is transparent. I love on TV when they use the word transparent, because you know it's not transparent when they say it's transparent. Let me tell you about what the fair tax considers transparent. The rate for the fair tax is 23%. 23%. Sounds high, but I'll show you how you're actually paying way more than that now. When you go to Walmart or any other retailer, what's written into the bill is on that receipt you get from the cash register. It's going to have a line on there that says fair tax, and it's going to print out the percentage. And then it's going to print out the dollars that you're giving the government that represents that 23% of what you're buying. If it ever changes, it's going to be right in front of every receipt on everything you buy. So people can't do backroom deals anymore. Okay? That's transparency. You can't change it. Well, you could change it, but everybody's going to see it, and everybody's going to see it immediately. Social Security and Medicare are fully funded. There's provisions in the bill which X amount of that 23% goes purely to fund those two agencies. Black markets, drugs, prostitution, they're finally going to pay taxes. They can't hide that anymore. You think those folks pay taxes now? Probably not. But do they buy suits, clothes, cars, homes, food? Yeah, they'll pay their taxes. Business decisions, strategic business decisions are made now, taking into account the tax consequences. And let me tell you, what I saw in my career was that at times the tax implications of going right or going left in a business problem weighed heavily on if you went right or left. contrary to what may have seemed intuitive as to we should go over here because it's the best long-term thing. If it wasn't the best financial thing because of some tax implications, you didn't do it. You don't do that anymore. You do what makes sense for your business. Families can save for college, retirement, new home, education for their kids, and not have to worry about people taking taxes, and they can make as much as their money to do so. There's only three what we call special provisions under the fair tax. One is this family consumption allowance. It's a prebate. Let me tell you how this works. Every legal head of household in this country who's not incarcerated will get a check at the beginning of each month to pay the taxes on the basic necessities of life. How's that work, Tone? Well, the way it works is the Health and Human Services, HHS, each year they ascribe income levels with family sizes to determine whether you are below or above the level of poverty. And right now for a family of four, man, wife, two kids, it's $32,000 unless you're at or below the poverty level. What's going to happen under the fair tax is the beginning of each month, that family of four is going to get 23% of $32,000 divided by 12, which is roughly $600 a month. And what's going to happen is, I'm going to assume that if somebody's at the poverty level, they're probably, and they have a family of four, they're probably spending all of the $32,000 to eat, put a roof over their head, and to clothe their kids. That's, I think, is a fair assumption. So all of a sudden, everything they're going to spend, they got a check to cover the tax on it. So their tax rate is 0. Now the janitor gets this, and Bill Gates gets this. Everybody who's the head of a household, legally in this country, and not incarcerated, gets a check. My wife and I, kids are gone, 2 of us, poverty level for 2, I think it's $22,000. So we'll get a check for roughly a little over $400 a month to pay the taxes on the first $22,000 that we spend. Do I have to spend $22,000? Nope. I don't have to. I can put that in my pocket. But you got to live. And the idea is, let's not penalize people who don't earn a lot of money by having a consumption tax that's a flat value, 23%. Regardless of the situation, it's 23%. That's how the prebate works. Now, there's no taxes on gifts to church or charities. Okay? No taxes on gifts to church or charities. It's a gift. It's not a consumable. Okay? Even though you get something out of it, let's go and pray, and hopefully the Lord blesses us for our prayers. But you don't get taxed on that, thank God. All right? Clinton Foundation is going to can be like anything else. They won't pay any income taxes, even if they maybe they should under the current situation. They're not going to pay any taxes, and Joe Blow, the janitor, isn't going to pay any taxes unless they go buy things. Then there's no taxes on primary, secondary, or post-secondary education. That's an investment in human capital. Okay? So we want people to be educated. We don't want to penalize you for not making much money. And we need to donate to churches and charities. Why not the flat tax? Anybody look at what the heck's his name? Rand Paul. Rand Paul, thank you. Rand Paul's proposal. They wrote it up in the Wall Street Journal on Friday or Thursday, whenever it was. It's a flat tax. Okay? Or why don't we modify our current system? Well, flat tax, you still have to report. You can still jiggle the books. That is, Congress or whomever can change things behind the scenes, and you don't know what's going on. It taxes your income level, and it has limited, if any, impact on the economy. What it is for a politician, though, it's a nice, safe thing that looks like you're doing something, but really doesn't have much effect on anything. Has limited or no effect on the economy. And that's the problem in this country, our economy. We have to have people working. America works when Americans work. When Americans don't work, we have troubles. And that's what we're going through the last X amount of years. In the current system, no comment. Who wins and loses under the fair tax? We win. People who work win. The economy wins, Social Security and Medicare win, and future generations, most importantly, future generations win. Who loses? Politicians and lobbyists lose because they can't affect the way we live by changing laws, changing tax laws. In Washington, D.C. right now, there are 33 registered lobbyists for every elected official in Washington, D.C. 33 lobbyists. And those 33 lobbyists are only working on basically one thing, just to impact some senator, some congressman, to change something in a system so it benefits whoever's paying that lobbyist pay. This is 2 adults, 2 children household, 2015, what the percentage would be under the fair tax. As you can see, somebody at the poverty level, it's actually, I said 32,000, it's 31,860. They pay nothing because they get the prebate. Everybody here gets the prebate. You know, Bill Gates is down there, the janitor's this way. If you're only making 16,000 a year, you're going to get 23% back. Okay? Because you've got the prebate, you're going to spend your 15,000, but you still got that money sitting in your pocket. Somebody who's making $64,000 going to pay 11.5%, 7.7 for $48,000, on and on and on. It never gets to 23 because everybody, even the richest person in the country, gets that prebate based on their family size. Okay? That's what it looks like under the fair tax. Can you see that okay in the back, folks? Okay. Yes, sir.
I was just going to ask, is that 23% on top of the state taxes?
Let me answer that this way. 45 states in this country have a state income tax. There's 5 that don't: Tennessee, Florida, 3 others. And almost all of them base their income tax on your 1040. That's the starting point for figuring out a state income tax. You know, go to this line of 1040, bring this over, blah, 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 blah. There's not going to be any more 1040s. So very likely what would happen is each state would determine what percentage they have to add to the 23% of purchases in their state. It's going to equate to the revenue that is generated now by the state income taxes. Most 99% chance that that's how it would work. They really don't have a lot of options. So it would be added to the 23%. Okay? But it's going to be, let's assume it's the same bucks under the current system and under the future system, under the fair tax system. Same dollars involved.
So a state would add 8 1/4, 8 1/2, whatever it could be revenue neutral?
Well, not that high, Scott. Let me tell you why. The base in the fair tax is so much broader than the current income tax base. So, you know, what's Alabama, 4.5%? Income. 5? Okay. So since the base that they tax gets bigger, that 5 comes down. Okay? Don't know what it is. I don't know that anybody's figured it out for Alabama.
Does the fair tax, it doesn't impact the states. In other words, the states can still keep their income tax, I suppose.
They can. They just have mechanical problems. How do they get it?
Well, it's no problem. Because you already have a 1040 that you form the state. You get your paper from the state. You said one to the state, one to the fed. And just be your employer prints one less.
There is no 1040.
That's right. But your employer will still print one for these states because it uses the same paper.
If you really think through this thing, it's much easier for the state to come out with some percentage to add to the tax. Because, you know, it doesn't cost zero for the state to collect all these income taxes. The current situation.
You're right, but since when does the state do things the right way?
Hey, when in doubt, assume the best.
And let's try and hold off the questions until the presentation. Then we'll bombard them.
It's okay.
I have a couple of my own as
It's
well.
okay. I mean, if something's bothering you and you need to ask, please ask. All right. So this is what your tax rate will look like. Let me go to this next one. It's bigger. You can see. This is kind of neat. Dollars earned to spend $100. Okay. Up across the top are the income tax brackets, starting with 10%, going all the way to 35. The next line down is the percent of tax returns in that bracket. For example, in the 10% bracket, there's 3.34% of all income tax forms filed are people who are in the 10% bracket. And at the far end, 35%, there's 1.47% of the population who files income tax in that bracket. So if you take those out, just for the heck of it, that leaves 95% between 15 and 30% in those brackets. If you're in a 15% bracket, and here's where a lot of folks are, about 63.5%, if you want to spend $100, you got to make $129.28 because $19.39 is going to the federal government, $9.89 is going out of your pocket and through the payroll tax back to the government. So you got to make $129 to spend $100. Under the fair tax, you got to make $100 to spend $100. If you're up at this end and you're in the 28% tax bracket and 21% of the people are there, you're going to make $100. You got to gross $155 to have $100 to spend. Isn't that ugly? But that's reality. That's what the federal government is taking out of our paychecks. That's what we're paying to the federal government. Okay? Big numbers. Now, this is busy, and I'm going to ask you just to bear with me. It's a busy graph. What this is Scott going into Ace Hardware and buying a hammer. When's the last time you did that, Scott? Is he handy? Deborah? Never? Let's assume he bought a hammer at Ace Hardware. But the example works for any kind of business that you would go in and buy something from. On the left side, from this line left, is the current income tax world. On the right side is the fair tax world. Let me take you through it. Basically, 4 steps are common to making some product that you're going to buy, in this case, a hammer. There's somebody who's the raw material supplier. There's somebody who owns the factory who's going to make that hammer. There's a distributor who buys hammers from a lot of different factories and has it there. And Ace Hardware comes and buys from a distributor. Okay? Common business practice. The things in blue here are what comes out of the system, in dark blue, what comes out of the system under the fair tax. For example, if Joe Blow, the raw material supplier, he certainly has his own costs to run his business, and part of them are operating expenses like CPAs or tax attorneys, things like that. But in these blues, he has to pay a payroll tax of 7.65% on every buck he pays to an employee. Let's assume he makes a profit. He's going to have to pay income tax on that profit. So you take those 2 blues, he adds them up, and that becomes his selling price to the factory. At the factory, it's their purchase cost. Over and above the purchase costs, they have operating expenses. They have to pay for gas and electric and supplies and blah, 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 blah. But they certainly probably employ someone who deals with their taxes, and maybe a number of people who deal with their taxes. They pay a payroll tax on every dollar they spend on an employee. They make a profit. They pay an income tax on that profit. 2 more blue hunks. Third guy is the distributor. Same deal. He buys it from the factory at this particular price. He has some operating expenses he puts into it. He has tax attorneys and or CPAs to help him, plus a whole bunch of other expenses. He pays a payroll tax. He makes a profit. He pays income tax on that profit. Goes over to good old Ace Hardware. Same deal. Ace buys it from the distributor at this price. He has operating expenses. He has payroll taxes he's going to pay. He makes a profit. He's going to pay income tax on that profit. You take all these blues and move them over here. You see what you got? You got a nice hunk of money that's tied up, embedded in the system, a term I used before. A lot of money tied up through federal income taxes or preparing for federal income taxes. So that's what happens in the fair tax, in the income tax world. So up top there, maybe Deborah goes in, she buys hammers, and she paid Ace for that hammer. Well, fair tax world. All this blue stuff comes out. It's just sucked out of the thing because nobody's paying anybody anything. Therefore, her purchase costs in the fair tax world go down. Operating expenses go down. They can still make a nice profit. Then you can throw the fair tax on top of that, and your final price is approximately what it cost before. That's how much extra stuff is in the price of a product that we buy. That's a lot. That is a lot. One more side point on this. I guess most of you heard of the VAT system, value-added tax. Europe and some other countries use it. And what it is, I'm not going into a lot of detail, but they tax steps of operations, and that's their tax on businesses. But a funny thing, if Germany If you make some product in Germany and you sell it in Germany, you pay the tax. If you make it in Germany and decide to sell it outside of Germany, the government gives you back all of these taxes. So what's Germany do? Well, why don't they come to the United States and sell a hammer for this price versus what Ace Hardware can sell there? We're at a competitive disadvantage because people under the VAT, they get their taxes refunded. Okay? Pretty neat system that the Europeans have going. Under the fair tax, not only can we go domestically and pay the same price, we can go offshore and start selling things competitively and beat the pants off people. Okay? Clumsy, but hopefully you understand the point. Corporate tax rates. How much do corporations pay in taxes? The answer is 0. You pay the taxes. Every time you buy their product, in the price you pay for their product is their taxes. Enough money to cover their taxes. However, the red line is the US, it's 39% roughly. The blue line is the OECD average, which is 83 developed countries that people have kept track on. Here's a graph of the last 20 years or so. They've come down to about 25.5%. We're still stuck at 39. Now, does the average corporation really pay monies physically to the government to the tune of 39%? No. The average tax for businesses in this country is 13%. Well, why is that? Because there's 74,000 pages in the tax code, which allows them to do different things to be able to come down with something more realistic to pay tax on, some lower amount of profit to pay tax on. But the other countries do the same thing. So once again, they have a competitive advantage due to taxes. I've given this to a number of senior groups. We don't have that many seniors here, but look at it anyway. This is the average remaining lifetime federal tax rate for seniors. If you're single or if you're a couple. Household income, and the assumption in all these things is your income, you spend it all. That's not necessarily so. Especially if you make, I don't know, $100,000, $250,000. When I made, that's not good. People, you don't spend all of that money. At least I never did. Look at the difference under the current system under the fair tax. Somebody who's only bringing in 10 grand, a single senior person, under the current system is paying 6.5%. They're going to have minus 27% of the fair tax. Somebody who's making a bunch of money, 32% under the current system, 9% under the fair tax. And it's the same logic when you go into a couple. It's significantly lower because the tax base is much broader. Let me show you this. This is the net average lifetime tax rate. So not just for seniors. And I have the next slide will break it down into 30-year-olds, 45-year-olds, and 60-year-olds. This is the average tax you're going to pay for your lifetime. Two systems. The orange is the current income tax, payroll tax system. The green is the fair tax. In each case, the fair tax is significantly less over your lifetime. Now, how do they come up with these numbers? Kinasachi. Anybody know what Kinasachi means? Kinasachi is Italian for how the heck am I supposed to know? I don't know how they come up with it, but they have to certainly make assumptions that said different age groups and what you're going to make, how you're going to be taxed, those kind of things. But it's significantly less. This is a bit fuzzy, but this breaks your lifetime federal tax rate down by age group. Young adult, 30 years old, somebody 45, somebody 60. And this is single households and married households. In each case, it's less under the fair tax, significantly less. Somebody making 100 grand a year, a young adult, paying 27.5% now, whether you realize it or not, going to pay 17.8% under the fair tax. Part of the reason the 23%, it isn't 23 is because you get the prebate. That reduces the amount of taxes you're going to have to pay. Okay, what do I need from you folks? I need you to call Bradley Byrne. Ask him why he's not co-sponsoring the fair tax. Joe Bonner was a willing co-sponsor of the fair tax. Bradley Byrne is not. Bradley Byrne likes flat tax. No facts, Tony's opinion. Flat tax does nothing for the economy It's a smoke screen that says we're doing something. We're going to make it simpler. Well, maybe it's a little simpler, but it does nothing for the economy, and the economy is the issue. This is the only thing that I've seen in my work career and then after that'll do something for the economy and get us going. There's 2 phone numbers for Bradley. If you're bashful and you don't want to call him, please write down that email. Just email him and say, hey, why aren't you a co-sponsor for fair tax? The more he gets of them, the more he'll be willing to do something. Take some pamphlets. I put a whole bunch of pamphlets. There's one at each of your places, hopefully. If you want to give them to your friends or pass them out at church or at your business, please take. I have a whole bunch of them there and more there. There's also some stickers for bumpers, indoor windows brought to fair tax. These signs, you see one there and one on the other side there. If you want one of those, either put in your home or put in your business, I have plenty of those. Just see me, you're more than likely, I am more than likely to give them to you. Join Americans for Fair Taxation. We are all volunteers. There's nobody paid in this situation. There was one person paid who was with us for a number of years. She has decided to leave. She's decided, like me, she needs to retire. So she's gone. Nobody's a paid employee anymore. All volunteers. Part of my money, out of that 22 million is part of my money. And not a whole heck of a lot, but part of my money is part of that 22 million that went to develop and support this thing. We could use every buck you can spare. It only costs you $10 to be a member for a year. Go to fairtax.org. There's a lot of different links there. Please join, $10. Take some literature. If there's any other group that you're exposed to who would like to hear this, I'm more than willing to address them. I've done this to a lot of different social and church groups. Questions of me at this point in time? Yes, sir.
What does this do for property taxes? What does it do for long-term capital gains? How are those recaptured?
Capital gains are irrelevant. There's no more. Capital gain is a form of income, right?
Yeah.
It's not taxed anymore. What's it do for property taxes? No impact. No impact. It just deals with income of any sort that the federal government currently taxes. Now, this doesn't replace every buck that the government gets, because they still get money from cigarette taxes, gas taxes, tariffs, that kind of thing. But this takes care of everything that they get through the federal income tax system. So it's a one for one. One goes out, one comes in. Other questions?
Does this require what 16th Amendment is to be rescinded?
Good point. The 16th Amendment was put together in 1913. It says the government can tax income. And it started out as a flat tax and only hit people who were above what was considered, at that point in time, I don't remember the dollar figure, but it was considered wealthy. $2,500. Yeah. You see what happened since then. You know, I don't dislike politicians. Please don't get me wrong. However, and I believe that when a politician goes into office, they go in with pure intentions. To get reelected, you got to do different things. You got to generate money, and apparently too many of them fall into the trap of yeah, I'll take your money, and here's what I want for giving you my money. It's just a function of the system that we've been living with for years. So I didn't answer your question. 16 minutes. Thank you, sir. There's a provision in the bill because it's felt that if this thing would pass, they don't want to cut off their nose to spite their face to politicians. They want to have the 16th Amendment there so that they can still tax income. And that's really dangerous. You put in a consumption tax and tax income. There's a provision in the bill that says if the 16th Amendment is not, what do you call it?
Ratified? Repealed.
Repealed, thank you. Repealed. At the end of the 6th year, the fair tax goes out the window and the whole income tax system comes back. That's a provision in the bill. So it has 6 years to prove itself. Or you go back to where you were. It becomes a hairy fight as to what do you do first? Do you pass the fair tax or do you get rid of the 16th Amendment? So what people with the fair tax have done is separate the issue.
If you don't rescind the 16th Amendment, all you're going to get is a European style fair tax on top of an income tax.
Well, I would think every logical person would understand that. Therefore, I would think once it's debated in the House and in the Senate, they would understand that. And we'd be saying, hey, we don't want to give you the ability to tax consumption and tax income. You better get rid of the 16th Amendment. So it's not in the bill that says it has to go right then, because the thoughts were that that would be tougher for people to swallow. But the provisions in there that I just talked about, 6 years, fair tax is out.
What's tough to swallow? They did away with the prohibition.
Let's say they're being conservative. Yes, sir.
You had mentioned something about a consumption tax, and this sounds to me, and I'm sorry I came in late, I missed something, but this sounds very much to be a consumption tax.
It is a consumption tax, sir. Yes.
And I've always understood from economists, whenever you tax something, you get less of it. And that concerns me greatly. And the other concern that I have about this is the issue of people who do not pay in getting money back, and maybe a larger portion of money. And that sounds to me to be replacing maybe an earned income tax credit to some extent, even though with everybody's going to get some money back regardless of based on their first, whatever you said, 22,000.
Well, based on their family size and poverty level.
That's why I've always been in favor of a flat tax, because it gives incentive to individuals who, all of us have been working at some point for $22,000 a year, and that motivates people to improve themselves and get better jobs.
Well, if nobody took a dime out of what you earn, wouldn't it motivate you to make as much as you can? Nobody took a dime out of it. The answer is yes. If I could keep every dime I earn, that's great. That's great. I don't know what could be more fair. I keep what I make. None of your business. The government would know what you make. Employers would still have to say how much you made, only for Social Security purposes, though. Okay, that would go to the Social Security Department, or that's part of the Treasury, I think, and they would keep track of how much money you made, so that when you get my age and you're on Social Security, they could dole out the correct amount because they knew how much you made. That's the only reporting of your income. But whether you make, $500,000 or $20,000, you make as much as you want. If you don't want to make money, that's your business. Now let's go back to the first part of your question. Maybe people who don't want to make much money, they're going to be getting this handout. Let's call it a handout. It's a prebate. They're getting a handout. Well, they're still going to have to live somehow, and they're going to have to buy things. Now you can say, well, somebody's on welfare, they get this and that. This doesn't deal with all that social science BS. That's a whole nother subject that politicians need to deal with. What it does, it addresses the income tax system as we know it today, and with a great byproduct of making the economy boom. So I can't fix, this thing doesn't fix someone who doesn't want to work. Our labor participation rate right now is, instead of the 66 and a half it's been traditionally, is down to a little less than 62, which is horrible. There's 4.5% times how many million people that don't want to work anymore. And part of the reason they don't want to work, now, one is maybe they can't find a job, but number two is they can get by with other services the government provides and don't have to work. And under fair tax, same thing happens. Same thing happens. Because some people call the prebate welfare. It's not. Let me tell you what the welfare is. If you want to call the prebate welfare for everybody, let me tell you what welfare is in the current federal income tax system. You know how much money the government gives back to you without you really thinking about it in a tax year, for everybody in a tax year? $950 billion. It's called deductions. Through deductions, the government is actually giving you back money. You don't have to pay tax on certain stuff because there's deductions that you can take from your gross income. Well, that's no different than a prebate. In a prebate, you get it up front. In deductions, you get it at the end of the year. Prebate is going to cost this country about $450 billion a year. Deductions cost this country $950 billion a year. So there's less money coming out of the government under this system. People don't think that way because, hey, a deduction, hey, I want my standard deduction, I want this deduction, I want that deduction. There's a lot of money tied up in those deductions. Did I answer your question, sir? Okay. Matt?
Sorry, go ahead.
My concern is somewhat like Scott's, and I'm a little fuzzy on, I like the plan, but I think you need to have the IRS killed with a stake in its heart when this plan passes. Because it'd be exactly like Europe when they were promised, well, we'll get this back, and then we'll do away with the income tax, but they never did. And now they've got both of them. Now, if this, let's say on January 1, 2016, this thing goes into effect, does that mean the IRS then will not collect any tax for 6 years? Or the IRS will just sit there and twiddle their thumbs, waiting to see if this thing works?
Okay.
How's that gonna be?
Okay, if this thing passes January 1st, 2016, the IRS won't be twiddling their thumbs. There's a provision in the bill that says they can exist for 2.2 years and 9 months because they're that far behind in processing things. They'll have all that time to catch up, and hopefully every taxpayer, they've grabbed the last buck out of a taxpayer from 9 years ago over a hassle, and they're done. No more funding for the IRS. Oh, the government can always put all kinds of taxes on you. They can.
The IRS will not collect any 2016, 17.
Correct. Come January 1st, 2016, there's no more taxes on income, dividends, interest, estates, any type of income you have, forget it. No more. No, wait, hold on. We'd have to pay taxes on 2015 if this became law in 2016, 1/1/16. Okay? But they serve no purpose other than cleaning up all the paperwork that is generated, and the bill gives them 2 years and 9 months to do so. Then, no more money.
See, my only problem with this is if you don't do it by amendment, say in December 2016, Congress could very easily amend that act that it passed and say, well, okay, for 2017, we're bringing back the IRS, and there would be nothing to stop it.
The politicians can do anything they want. However, they got to deal with people, their constituents. Now, if people aren't interested in what's going on and don't realize what the government's doing to them, yeah, I think that's how we ended up in the mess we are now. Not enough people understand what's going on and give voice to their complaints. Matt?
You know, the hardest thing for me to understand in this process is I love the fact about the repatriation of funds. I like how that 23% additional tax actually gets absorbed in those embedded taxes, so we really shouldn't see any increase in costs. So all that makes sense to me, but the broadening of the tax base doesn't make a lot of sense. And all the numbers you've shown seem to show that each tax bracket are actually going to pay less than they're currently paying now. So how is the tax base broadening then if every category is paying less?
Okay. Oh.
And I know that's getting down to the weeds a little bit.
Yeah, it is. And I think the best way to answer that question, services are taxed under the fair tax. You go to the dentist. Today you don't pay any taxes. In the future, under the fair tax, you'll pay taxes. And the logic being, instead of buying a hammer at Ace, you're buying dental treatment at Joe Blow the dentist. He's going to have expenses disappearing out of his cost of doing business. Therefore, he ought to be able to have a price, once you put the fair tax on top of it, is approximately the same. The part of the debate with the fair tax people and a lot of critics of the fair tax is, how fast is this going to happen? And that's the magic question. How fast is it going to happen, the reduction in cost? In some staples, let's call it, milk, bread, you'd think it happened pretty fast. In others, it's going to take a while for this to make its way through, and we see the prices drop back to the approximate level they were before, and you have all this additional spending power. The base is bigger, taxes, services, there's something like 600, my number might be wrong, dollars spent in this country by foreigners, and I don't mean illegal people, I mean people coming to visit this country that the federal government doesn't get any tax on. All of a sudden our tax base gets bigger because that's one of the helps also. But it's significantly bigger. There's a number of papers that have been, I have them and I can certainly forward them to you, that go through the weeds on this thing, and it's really ugly. I mean, I'm a pretty good number guy, but following this thing all the way through was really difficult. But that's what it does. I mean, the thing isn't perfect. However, it beats the hell out of what we have now. And it addresses the biggest problem we have in this country, that is people working and making a decent wage.
Tony,
Yes, sir.
I love the idea, I read the book. You got to I don't know, 15 years ago, the deal that Linda came out with it.
10 years ago, 2005 was the first book.
So, but the target may be too big to be the United States, the federal government. My target is better if you try the state of Alabama and the legislature of Alabama moving off the income tax to the fair tax.
Okay.
As a moratorium, and then you go to Nebraska and try it, and you go to North Dakota and try it, and so forth and so on.
Okay, good point. Good point. The guy who I report to is a guy named Chuck Bailey out of Huntsville area. He's the representative for the state, and we're broken down into congressional districts. Anyhow, he wants to do that in Alabama. He wants us to push that. I tell him, no, don't do it. Let me tell you why. This doesn't happen if it's just a fair tax in Alabama. This doesn't happen. So you end up paying a consumption tax on top of prices where they are today. How much do we buy that's actually made in Alabama? I bet you 85% of what you buy, maybe even more than that, does not come from the state of Alabama. So nothing happens to prices, taxes on top of that. I think it's a disaster going state by state. You have to have my opinion, you have to have the impact of this. He doesn't agree with me, so he's running off trying to. Yes, sir.
If you were to do that, say our sales tax went up to 23% or whatever, those businesses on the borders of Mississippi, Georgia, and Tennessee, and Florida would just dry up because no one would shop there if they had the choice of going 2 miles down the road.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, still, you're right. I'd drive to Pensacola myself and buy everything. If Alabama had the fair tax and nobody else did, or Florida didn't and Mississippi didn't, I'd go to Pensacola and buy everything. I'm not going to pay less money for it. That's the problem when you do it piece by piece. It's got to be whole heart. Yes, sir.
All right, I'm just going to try to clarify this. So you would still pay the state sales tax on top of this, correct?
Every non-federal tax continues. It might change in percent based on how they did it, but it would continue because that body that gets those taxes needs revenue.
So in reality, it pretty much be like a 13.5%?
Don't know. However, some of those other things we looked at, you're going to be paying. You don't realize what you're paying now. It's going to be less. That's the issue. Don't know what the number's going to be. Well, people even sit here 23%, they go, oh my God. They don't realize what they're paying now.
Well, another concern was, would this create a large conglomerate of black markets?
That's a point that some critics have argued that Tony Soprano is going to have a suitcase selling suits out of his trunk. Excuse me?
Suits got to be made somewhere.
Yeah, that's possible. However,
I think would it be true that Tony Soprano is probably also not filing an income tax statement?
Oh,
and now
exactly.
He's going to have to pay taxes whenever he buys food at the grocery store.
Yeah, but he has his health insurance through the Bricklayers Union. It was episode 4 or something. I don't know. Yes, sir, in the back. Excuse me? Correct, yes. Yep. Yep. You spend money, you're going to get taxed on it. Other than donations to a church or charity, paying for your child's or somebody's education. Other than that, there's going to be a tax on it. That's why the base is so broad. Yep. And like I say, one of the earlier slides said 95% of the system is already set up. It's retailers. Yeah, doctors, lawyers, Indian chiefs, they're all going to have to, set up a system. But, How's that affect health insurance? Well, that's a service, so there'd be a tax on it. Well, the consumer pays it, but you're back to this. You know, you think insurance companies don't have this going on? They do. They do. They got a lot of employees who are paying 7.65% on. They got a lot of other things that they buy to maintain their business. Embedded taxes come out. There was a study done, and I'm not going to quote these numbers right. This was like 7, 8 years ago. Different industries in the United States and how much the fair tax would take out of their cost of doing business. And my numbers are close, but I think the lowest one was 18%, and it was the leather goods industry. And the highest one of costs to come out of the leather goods industry, and I believe it was 28% out of the auto industry. I mean, the auto industry doesn't get 28% by going to Mexico, to Monterrey, Mexico, and building, you know, Tempos or whatever the heck the car is. So that's a study from X amount of years ago. It's real. Money comes out. And like I say, we wouldn't have taken a job offshore had this been in effect. Isaiah?
I just have one more question.
Yes.
Would this be on the petroleum taxes as well? Would this be 23%? On fuel?
Yeah.
So for every gallon, it would be a 23%?
Yep, but once again, everybody who touches that end product going all the way back to getting it out of the ground, it's just a matter of, you know, how quick that reduction in costs hits that industry. Okay? And you know what happens in America is, you know, let me give you a good example. Flat screen TVs. 5 years ago, how much did one like this cost? And how much does it cost today? Significantly less. Because what will happen in business is, if Joe Blow reduces his price 5%, his competitors most likely are going to meet that, especially when they got a 20% cushion in there somewhere. So prices will eventually wheedle their way down. Okay. Somebody else. Deborah.
Tony, looking at the
Brochure?
here, it says that we'll pay national sales tax when we buy new goods and services, but not on used products.
Right. Oh, I didn't make that point. Good point.
What would that do to the automobile industry? Because
Good question.
It appears that it would discourage production of new vehicles, and you'd have used car lots everywhere.
Good, very good question. And I'm sorry I didn't bring that point up. It didn't emphasize. It's only new goods and services. So a used car, a used home, you're not going to pay a consumption tax because the taxes have already been paid on that, the 23%, either through the current income tax system that we have now or when somebody bought it new after the fair tax goes in. So think about what happens. Everybody's going to want to go buy a used car, right? There's not enough rather than new car. There's not enough used cars to supply to meet the demand. So some of those people are going to get used cars, but then a whole bunch of people are going to have to buy a new car if they want a different car. Same thing is true on a home. Everybody's going to want to not want to buy immediately a brand new home. But then, you know, there's not enough supply of used homes, and people are going to have to buy new homes. But then what kicks in to both automobiles and real estate is this. All of a sudden, to build a new home or build a new car, it's not going to cost you what it cost you before. So the price of that new car or new home most likely comes down. The market balances out. It takes time to do that, certainly, but the market balances out, and then there's equilibrium like we have now. If you want an old car, you buy a used car. If you want a new one, yes, sir, Matt.
I guess I would just say as a kind of a comment or recommendation to the organization is it seems like a question that I have and everybody seems to have here. If there was some type of graphic that said, okay, if you're buying a health service from a doctor, here's what you pay now, here are the hidden costs that we would anticipate it would go down, and then when you add the fair tax back on top of that, how close are you to what you're paying right now for all these different industries? Or if there was a graphic like that, because that is, especially when you talk about services, we're not used to getting taxed on services right now.
That's different.
And suddenly we are. But if you could show, or if it was in fact the case that if I go hire an attorney, that's going to go down because his costs are going to go down, and then it's going to go back up with the tax and still be close to the same amount. I'm not sure if anything like that been created, but it would be helpful to someone like me.
Go to fairtax.org. Okay, there's different links. There's been so many, one of the reasons there have been $22 million spent is because people have said, what about this, what about this, what about this, what about this? And it goes back to a number of economists, PhDs, who do the research, come back 3 months later with a paper that explains all that. And that website is full of those kind of things. Now, does it have graphs for every industry? I haven't seen that. We use this as, a typical product, good old hammer. But it typifies what happens when you make something and you buy it at the retail level.
Anybody have a final question this evening? It's been a great discussion. I've learned a lot. Please join with me as we give Mr. Gasbarro a round of applause.
Thank you.
Feel free to take some of his material. If you have
Please.
any other questions, please come up and
There's sticker. Let me ask you this also. If you would like, I can keep you abreast of what's new in the fair tax world. If you could put your name and email address on a list, that would help. I won't send you a whole bunch of stuff other than a few things. Just one more thing. Right now it sits in the House Ways and Means Committee. Okay? It's made it that far, which is a big step. Another thing is Paul Ryan has changed the way they evaluate things. Instead of a static system to evaluate bills and the taxation of, or the monetary effects of taxation changes, it's a dynamic, which means what impact does it have on the economy? Whereas before, if you're going to reduce something 1%, they took a static number, it's 1%. Not what it'll do down the road. And that's a good thing for the fair tax, because if you use that logic, you get this, and you get these booming economy. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, well, thank you everybody for coming tonight.